Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the General Eclectic Podcast with Roger. I'm your host, Kale Zeldin. And Rod, we had great plans of a regular week in, week out recording schedule, but something funny happened on the way to England. Now, look, I know that a lot of people who watch and listen to our show follow your blog, but I bet there are a lot of people out there who just don't kind of know what's going on. So, dude, lay it on us. Where you been and who'd you see and how come you couldn't get back?
Well, if you're coming to us by video, you can see that I'm in a hotel room. I'm in Budapest, Hungary right now, a place I didn't expect to be for a while. I'd gone from Austria, from Vienna, where I'm living this summer, to England. I was going to give a couple talks at Oxford and Cambridge, and then head on down to France to do some research for my book on re-enchantment. It was great at Oxford and Cambridge. I got to meet a lot of serious young Christians. Got to meet Ian McGilchrist, the great author whose book The Matter with Things is just rocking my world. I know you're reading it right now too, and I'm reading The Master and His Emissary first. I really wanted to do sort of this in order, so I've got the other Kindles lined up ready to go. But it's thick stuff, man. It is, but it's just revolutionary. He's a psychiatrist. We talked about him before. He's a psychiatrist who's got this new book called The Matter with Things that I think is just revolutionary. One of the great books of our time. It's right up there with A Secular Age by Charles Taylor in terms of its size and it talking about perception of the numinous, of the of matter. I mean, I don't even want to go down that hole now. Anyway, I got to be with him on a panel in Oxford and saw so many really interesting people who came out to hear him, including Sir Tom Stoppard, the greatest living playwright in English right now. Yeah, and he came and we got to go to dinner later.
No way.
And that was pretty cool. He said, we were talking at over drinks, and he said, I can't even do his accent, but he said something like, I seem to have stumbled into a bush of conservatives. I said, oh, yes, you have. He said, and most of them seem to be Christian. I'm like, yeah.
Guilty.
He was game and really enjoyed being with him. And I also got to try something very weird there. One of the Oxonians gave me some snuff. Not the kind of snuff you and I grew up with where you put the dip in your mouth and spit it. I've never done that. Right. This was old-fashioned Jane Austen era, snorted up your nose snuff.
So funny. I've always heard about this and read about it, but I've never tried it. What is it like?
I think it existed. Well, it does. You can buy it at a tobacconist in Oxford, and people at Cambridge said, "Oh, that's so Oxford." But anyway, I put a little bit on my. You got to put it in your finger, make a kind of C with your between your thumb and your forefinger. You put it right there, then give it a little sniff. And it's like gunpowder going up your nose, but it gives you a little bit of a toot. But it was mostly fun just to be doing this Jane Austen era thing. Anyway, long story short, get back to Cambridge.
Can I ask you a question about McGilchrist real quick? So, sorry, audience, I'm going to interrupt Rod here. I'm curious as someone, I'm reading McGilchrist right now, his first book, Master and His Emissary, as I noted. And I'm just curious, you were with him on a panel. What, I think he's amazing, and I've seen, some YouTube videos of his. I've seen some appearances that he's done, and he just strikes me as just a great guy and just expansive and affable and all those kind of things that you would sort of expect. But how is he received by an audience? Just out of curiosity, what did you notice?
People seem to really respond to him. He's very even-tempered. He's a Scotsman, right?
Yeah.
And very well-spoken, but people are curious about what he has to say because he's speaking as a scientist, as a psychiatrist, but also he's got an advanced degree in English literature, I believe.
Right. That's correct.
And he's talking about the importance, in part, of beauty to our understanding of reality. And of course, this is catnip for me. This is right.
Totally, yeah.
But one of the people I met there, Kale, was a young Anglican ordinand named Daniel Kim. He is of Korean descent, born and raised in Britain, and is now a seminarian for the Church of England, 27 years old. He he told me that we went out for lunch, and I interviewed him for my book because of some comments he had made in the Ian session. He told me that he had been in advertising in London before he felt the call into the priesthood. And one of the things that was interesting to him was he worked in a really high-level agency, and he said that as far as he knew, he was the only Christian in that agency. Right. But also there were no atheists. He said everybody else was involved in some way with New Age or the occult. He said there were even some Satanists there who defined Satanism as living up to your fullest human potential.
Sure.
And it was really creepy to hear this, but he was actually fairly optimistic in a C.S. Lewis kind of way. He said, no, the fact that they believe in something that's not materialism, pure materialism, gives us Christians something to work with. And I mean, I'm never going to be excited about people in advertising who are creating the images that sell things being into the occult, but maybe this guy has something right. But he did say, and again, this is a 27-year-old working at a very high creative level in London. He said that the new atheism is dead. He said nobody's even having those arguments anymore.
I mean, that is so fascinating because, you and I have been on the internet for a long time, and you've been active in public on the internet for a long time, but I've been a lurker for a long time. And man, new atheism was totally ascendant for, better part of 20 years, wouldn't you say? I mean, they really got a big boost post 9/11. Sort of like the hell with all religion was sort of like a kind of fuel that really made their rocket rise. But I mean, if you would have told me 5 years ago that the new atheism was sort of DOA, like that's kind of remarkable, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And Christopher Hitchens is dead, and so is his project. And Daniel indicated that it's mostly a matter of people need something to live by. And this correlates with the work that Tara Isabella Burton did in her book Strange Rites, R-I-T-E-S, a couple years ago, where she's talking about that's the reality. That's what social science shows us about Generation Z, is that not that they don't believe in anything, it's that they do believe in anything. I think that this is... this bodes well for my re-enchantment book because I want to show people that, that there is something out there. And Ian McGilchrist does this too. Ian McGilchrist never refers to God or any kind of deity, although he mentions the possibility of God's existence, but his argument doesn't depend on that. But he's talking about the necessity, the logical necessity for a realm of the transcendent and what neuroscience has and physics have to say about that. So that was really, really interesting.
Well, what strikes me is interesting about the new atheism movement and its decline, and sort of what McGilchrist is doing with this is sort of clearing out a space for a kind of reasonable, acceptance of a much more complicated metaphysics than has been posited again for the last 2 decades. Is the relative low resolution take on, the whole idea of God or the gods. It's an element of the critique, that I think goes unremarked upon. And I wondered what you think about this. In other words, you have to account for the phenomena that people have believed in gods for a really long time. And to merely dismiss it as the kind of hallucinations, a kind of group mass hypnosis, some kind of it rests on such a radical sort of conspiracy theory that it doesn't seem that anybody has really poked that enough, because there just seem to be so many holes in that low resolution take. I wonder what you think about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, Ian McGilchrist is all over that again as a 21st century scientist.
Yeah.
And it's not a God in the gaps kind of thing, but he's just talking about how pure materialism, philosophical materialism, the idea that there is nothing more than what we can see, hear, feel, taste, smell, it's just dead because it can't hold up. And I can't even begin to recount his argument here, but he's saying that the people who are holding on to it are actually stuck in the 20th century. And there's way too much going on in physics right now and neuroscience to make that hold up. One of the things I talked about in my response to Ian at the Oxford thing was the whole weird hypothesis, Western educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic, and how we in the modern West are total outliers on all of human history, and indeed outliers in the world today. And there has to be something, it just seems like as a matter of humility, of intellectual, epistemic humility, we would...
No, this is exactly what I'm trying to get at. Nobody's going to hold a gun next to your head and say, you have to believe in God, but you have to account for the fact that we are such a radical outlier, both in terms of history, which I can see how they would easily try to dismiss that, although I think it's silly, but also just in the now. You do not live in, LA, San Francisco, Chicago, New York, Boston, DC, London, Paris, and half of Rome. You sort of get the impression in the sort of the sophisticated managerial classes that, religious belief is not only stupid, but wrong, right? Like kind of morally wrong. And it's just, I don't think they quite appreciate how on an island they are.
Yeah.
That's about that.
Definitely true.
And so something that I've been thinking about, Rod, let's say in the last 50 years, because that roughly captures both of us. Why was it so compelling that, that the new atheists sort of were able to be so powerful and influential in the last 20 years, and like what is the hope or the promise in it? What is the good that do you think people saw in new atheism? Because I've been trying to diagnose that myself. Like, why was that so compelling to people?
I don't think it's that hard, really. I mean, if God doesn't exist, then you're free to do what you want.
Mm-hmm.
And
so it's a liberatory space.
Right. And, to borrow something from our friend Mary Harrington, remember how she wrote this controversial piece last year in unheard.com about how the true religion of America is Satanism.
Yeah.
And what she was talking about there is Satanism. Classic Satanism is the idea that I can do whatever I want because I am God. I am at the center of the universe and there is no God. Well, Mary talked about how that's actually what modern America has come to believe. We dress it up in different ways, but that the triumph of the individual will is what we really believe in. And I think the new atheism was a very intellectualized and intellectually respectable way of talking about that. Now, Christopher Hitchens was nothing if not moral, but it's just what do his morals stand on? That's the problem there. But I think it's also the case that Christianity had become so watered down and weak and just something very hard to respect. I can remember even
So you're saying sort of from two different sides. You sort of the relative compelling nature of the new atheism and the relative sort of weak sauce gruel of contemporary Christianity.
Sure.
Okay.
We've gone over in this podcast before many times our conversion stories, and I remember I got rid of my Christianity as a teenager because I thought it was nothing more than middle class morality, or at one extreme, Jimmy Swaggart banging on TV and asking for money. Right. But that was totally a time and place bound perception on my part. And it wasn't until I saw a medieval cathedral in France that suddenly that shook me out of my bubble. And I think that's generally what has happened, or what is happening right now, that people are thinking there's got to be more than this. Yeah. The problem is so much of Christianity can't respond to the moment. And I'm sort of stepping over myself into the Martin Shaw stuff. And I don't want to get there just yet. I want to talk about what happened since then. So anyway, I got to have dinner at Oxford one night with Cardinal Muller, Gerhard Muller. He was the former head doctrine chief of the Catholic Church under Pope Benedict. Pope Francis sent him down. He's an arch conservative, and I just loved him. I Sat next to him at a table in Oxford, and I said, I don't know what I asked specifically. It was something like, "So, Cardinal, how are things going in the church?" He looks at me. He's a big man, like maybe 6'4" and all that.
Wow.
These massive hands. He's an oak of a man. He said, "It is a shit show." I'm gonna like you, Cardinal.
Yeah, we just got to be friends, didn't we?
Yeah, no, but I really enjoyed being with him. Very, very serious man. Incredibly worried about the deconstruction, the self deconstruction of the Catholic Church and of the West. He thinks the two are connected, and of course that.
Well, I mean, that's been your point, right? I mean, even as a you're not a Catholic, you're Orthodox, but you've always recognized that so goes the Church, so goes the West. It would seem, and it sounds to me like he sort of boosted that idea. For you.
And at the end of the dinner, we both did a little toot of snuff, and they brought it around in a silver, not kind of like a tureen, a snuff bowl or something. This is high table Oxford Pusey house. It was awesome. So I get ready to come back to Vienna. I get on a plane and late night flight back to Vienna from London. Get off the plane, walk up to the border police, show them my passport. "There is a problem, sir." Sat there for half an hour. The whole terminal cleared out, and they said, "We can't let you in." I had overstayed my Schengen allotment. You get like 90 days out of 180.
What is Schengen? What is allotment? What are you talking about?
You don't want to go down this.
It's just an EU thing?
Yeah. It was my fault. They were right. Okay. And I said, "Oh, man, I'm sorry." I said, "Well, you've got to go back to England." I said, "Well, it's after midnight now. There are no more flights. I'll just go to my apartment here in Vienna. I'll come back in the morning and get on the next flight." "No, sir, we can't let you out." I had to sleep on a bench in the airport chapel. It was awesome. And I get on a plane back to England and spend the next couple of weeks trying to figure out how to get back to continental Europe. But the good thing about it was during that time, I read about St. Cuthbert. I read the history, St. Bede, the guy who wrote the ecclesiastical history of the English church.
Speaking people.
Yeah. English-speaking peoples. I read his short life of St. Cuthbert, of Lindisfarne, all these Anglo-Saxon saints of the early Middle Ages. I really love it, Kale.
They're great. They're great. I love English Christianity. Like I really, really do. It's been, there's a little thing called the Reformation that happened that I'm not as big of a fan.
No.
But that early stuff is so damn good. Wow, it's so good. It's so good.
I know St. Cuthbert. I mean, I just vaguely knew who he was. He was a miracle-working bishop of Lindisfarne in the far north of England, famous monastery. And he worked so many miracles. And what's interesting about Bede is Bede didn't know him, but Bede was alive right after he died. And Bede talked to people who had known him. And I was talking to Malcolm Guite, the well-known English poet and Anglican priest. And he said what makes Bede so interesting, in part, as from the historiographical perspective, is Bede went out and talked to different people who had been witness to the same event. And he talks about that in the book, saying, "Well, I talked to so-and-so, and I checked it with this person, checked it with that person." But all of this stuff, I'd been focusing so much on continental Europe and also the Orthodox world, these wonder workers. We got them in the English-speaking world, too, from that era. And I ended up deciding that I was going to go back to England and go up there and try to visit some of these places as part of my my research for the reenchantment. So I'm having... sorry, you wanted to say something?
No.
So I'm having had lunch with Malcolm Guite, and he mentions what has happened to Martin Shaw. Like, I don't know who Martin Shaw is. He said, "Oh, he's a really big deal here in kind of New Age circles, neo-pagan circles, and men's movement." I don't know if Martin Shaw was actually a pagan, but he made his name as a storyteller and as a specialist on myth. He would lead people out into retreats in the woods. Really big deal. This Christian friend of mine, Caleb Stiegel, who is a justice on the Kansas State Supreme Court, a very solid Christian, but also a big fan of Martin Shaw for the work he's done in storytelling. Well, Malcolm says that Martin has recently converted to Christianity. Like, really? Martin's like 51 years old. And I ended up getting in touch with Martin, to make a long story short, and it's true. Here's what happened to Martin. He was out in the woods in the west of England where he lives on a 101-day retreat, just out there by himself, fasting, being alone, being ascetical, trying to ask the universe, what do I do next?
Right.
On his last night in the woods, it's cold, and he, instead of looking around the woods, he decides to look up, and he sees coming down from the sky a sort of rainbow. He said it was more like the aurora borealis, but it was multiple colors, and it landed like an arrow from the sky right next to him. And it kind of freaked him out. He said he's never seen anything like that. He gets in his tent to sleep, and he's haunted by dreams. And in the dreams, he's being pursued by a stag. And the stag won't leave him alone. He's tearing down the brush and all his defenses. He wakes up the next morning and realizes that stag is Jesus Christ.
Wow.
Yeah, he ends up contacting Malcolm. Maybe they knew each other. He knew that Malcolm, because Malcolm has done a lot of work on the Arthur legends.
Right. Oh, okay.
Yeah. And he says, Malcolm, I think Jesus Christ is pursuing me. Malcolm said, well, Lent's about to start. You better go get yourself ashed and just turn up at a monastery. Nobody will know who you are. Just get yourself ashed and ask God to show you what to do. And he ended up getting himself baptized. I don't know who baptized him. I think if Malcolm is right, it was just some Christian friends he met. But I ended up talking to Martin after all this, and Martin said that he had gone to a Baptist church, and he said they were really nice people. He went to a Church of England parish, nice people, same with the Catholics. But when he walked into an Orthodox church, he said, I felt like I'd walked into Christian dreaming. And he said he could not believe how deep it was. When he came out, he was so dazzled and didn't know what to make of it. He was in his car driving, and he ran a red light, and that nearly caused a wreck, and people started yelling at him. He rolled his window down and said, don't you understand? I've just come from church.
That's good.
But I ended up buying a couple of his books just to check him out, because I ended up saying he and Paul Kingsnorth are friends, and he's going to become Orthodox, Martin said. And Martin's going to become Orthodox. And so I'm going to end up going with him, and Paul Kingsnorth are going to try to put together a tour of holy places in Ireland for later this fall. But I bought a couple of Martin's books to read, and man, they're really something, Kale. He talks about myth, not in the sense of trying to explain how myth works, but he wants to pull you, the reader, into the stories to try to figure out, what does this mean for you?
It's those of us who are not Orthodox and who have a very kind of, I guess I would say, a kind of modernist, small m modernist experience with liturgy, forget how much of the grand edifice of expansive Christianity is built upon the deeply weird and the deeply mysterious. I've read two things that remind me. I was reading a biography of Thomas More by Peter Ackroyd, and I was reading Stripping of the Altars by Eamon Duffy. Right. And in both of those, you get this, they're both so wonderfully rendered, and especially Ackroyd. He's just such a good writer. I think he's a novelist as well as a biographer and historian. And you just get this evocative, mysterious, strange, amazing kind of mystical vision of modern Christianity. I'm going to sort of roughly just call it pre-modern Christianity but basically, liturgy before the Reformation, right. Here in the West. It's such a rich tradition that, I guess I just don't think it's any surprise. Now, why has it surprised me that we've lived through this disenchantment? Because our liturgies have been stripped of all enchantment. and have been sort of tamed. And I'm sort of using that word kind of on purpose. There's been this taming of liturgical Christianity. It sort of leads with idea rather than leading with experience. And, there's a certain beauty, I suppose, to it. But if you've ever stepped into, for those of us in the audience who are not Orthodox, if you've never stepped into a liturgy like that, you really don't have a full appreciation of the history of Christianity. And, I remember I had an experience when I lived in Rome in the winter and spring of 1993. I went to a Russian Rite Catholic church, and it was up there by, I think it was up there by St. John Lateran. But at any rate, it was basically, for all intents and purposes, remember talking with some Orthodox people, it's basically an Orthodox liturgy. And it had
Eastern
everything.
Rite Catholic churches use the liturgy of St. John Chrysostom.
Right. Okay. So it had everything. It had it had the rood screen, and so that the priest would only the priest could go into the sanctuary. You could kind of vaguely see through it, but you could hear. And I just remember being so overwhelmed and confident that I was in, what you and I have talked about, and others, of course, this idea of a thin space. But it was more than just a thin space, right? I mean, because you can experience that in the face of something that's just sort of rendered beautiful, like Chart, let's say, that's not in the middle of a mass or a liturgy. Chart itself can kind of overwhelm you that way. But when you are present at a liturgy like that, it's not a thin space as much as it's sort of a thin experience. And I don't know if that language makes sense for you or for our audience. But I don't think we quite appreciate what we've lost.
Yeah, well, it was so interesting to me as an Orthodox Christian to hear Martin's experience of this, coming into it cold as a man who has spent most of his adult life living in the mythical world. Because he's experiencing it as how Tolkien convinced Lewis to become a Christian. This is the myth that's true.
Right.
Well, and reading a couple of his books about myth and being drawn into it myself, and it helped me to understand my own orthodoxy better, because in the Orthodox Church, mystery, which is another word for sacrament, mysteries aren't problems to be solved, they're to be lived. And Martin tells you that about myth when he talks about these different myths. He wants you to see how does this myth work? What's it tell you about your life and about what steps you should take next? And now here he is coming into Christianity, and when he talks about reading Mark's gospel and just being shaken out of what was left of any atheism, he said that he realized that Christ is who he said he was, and that Christ is like a shamanic figure. He said that Martin said, when I got to the end of the gospel, I said, all of this is true. It really happened that way. And Paul Kingsnorth and I were emailing about it, because he and Martin have been friends for a long time. And Paul said, we need to all be about the process of rewilding Christianity.
Okay, wow. Right. So this was Mark? Is that what you said?
The Gospel of Mark, yeah.
Yeah, of course, that's the one, there's some good arguments that people have made that is the one that is sort of most closely connected to Peter.
Yeah.
And so it's this sort of very, sort of raw and immediate feeling. I can recommend that Pakaluk book. Which is fantastic on that. But anyway, so Kingsnorth, this idea of rewilding. Can you open that up a little bit for us? Because I'm tracking with you. I'm right there with you, but I'm not sure if we've laid it out enough.
Yeah. Well, Kingsnorth comes out of this world too, and he became a Christian because he felt Christ was pursuing him. He became a Christian, and indeed an Orthodox Christian, about 2 years ago, and. Both of those men believe and are chosen to turn away from the very weak sauce evangelicalism in which they were raised. I don't even know if Paul got that much, but they just thought that there was nothing to it. And, it was just a bunch of nice English people being polite and hearing a moral lecture and all that. and there's just nothing there for them. But
well, and you can see how modernity could do that, though.
Sure.
Right, because there's such a power that modernity has been able to harness by ignoring all that.
Yeah.
The weird, the mystery stuff. So to keep going. Sorry.
Yeah. So anyway, when you encounter Orthodox Christianity, you are encountering a form of Christianity that is the one that's truest in its forms to the experience of the ancient church. So when you go to an Orthodox liturgy, it's not the same thing exactly that Cuthbert celebrated, but it's the closest thing we have to that. And you can feel like you're very much in touch with that ancient world. That's one of the things that struck me about Orthodoxy after practicing it for a while. It's how often the lives of the early saints, the early church, the patristic era, the early medieval era, how fresh those are, how often they are invoked, discussed. Those saints are discussed. So they are so much part of the imaginary life, the social imaginary, if you will, of Orthodoxy. And what's cool to me is to see these men coming out of paganism or quasi-paganism and being, struck hard between the eyes by the wildness and the wild mysticism of Orthodox Christianity, and to discover that this is not something from the history books, but this is something right here, right now.
Right.
I was in at Divine Liturgy in Budapest the other day, and I'm kind of getting ahead of myself again, but I was in Budapest, and it was a tiny room, Kale, in the downtown. It was a small Greek chapel, very tiny room. They didn't have the AC on. It was hot. And they had two chanters, a man and a woman, but they were chanting this haunting Byzantine chant. And
Byzantine chant is next level, man. I used to have a couple of CDs of Byzantine chant. It's like you could trace it direct, like right. It sounds so Jerusalem.
Yeah, it does.
It really is amazing.
Yeah, and it's I'm used to Slavic chant because that's the tradition of Orthodoxy that I was brought in. But the Byzantine is something else. I felt that little room could have been. I could have walked out on the street at any point in history. It was that powerful. And maybe I should tell you how I got to Budapest.
Well, I think so. So you were marooned, poor you, right, in Cambridge for several weeks and in couple weeks. Yes, a couple of weeks. And so all right. So take us then. So you got a ticket back, but you can't go to Vienna.
Can't go to Vienna. I got an official invitation to Hungary because and the Hungarians are going to arrange my visa so I can stay in Europe in the Schengen zone, and I'm still working on that right now. I went and did paperwork today. But the reason they brought me over was because I had a job offer at the Danube Institute, where I've been a visiting fellow twice. They want me to come over and go to work there and work to build a network of conservative and Christian public intellectuals, thought leaders, journalists, writers, artists, etc., so we can build, have conferences, have collaborations, things like that. Basically, the kind of conservatives and Christians that you and I are, and they don't have any agenda beyond let's get something going, because there's so many disparate figures out there who don't really fit into the zombie Reaganism world, but are still conservative and who are interested in. I mean, it's kind of a live not by lies thing. Christians and conservatives who see what's going on and who want to figure out what do we do about it. And this is catnip to me. I used that word twice already, I think, but
twice.
But in the different travels I've done around Europe with Benedict Option book and Live Not By Lies, I've seen so much hunger there among people who are believers and who are conservatives who just want some kind of leadership. And they want not only leadership, they want community. And I, for example, didn't know much of anything about Dutch Reformed people. I knew about Dutch Reformed in the U.S., but I assumed Christianity was all but dead in the Netherlands. Not so among a lot of the Dutch Reformed. Their churches are full. There is a Bible Belt in the Netherlands, and those churches are full.
It's our friend Paul Vanderklee's denomination.
Exactly. And those guys, they're great. Those Christians, very conservative, more conservative than me in some ways. But they want to collaborate. They know that they're small in number. And anyway, I've been invited to come over here and to work on that project, and makes me think about my hero, Father Tomislav Kalakovich, the man I dedicated Live Not by Lies to, who spent the 5 years before communism came to Eastern Europe, preparing the Slovak Church for persecution. And man, there are a lot of people over here. You never read about them in the papers or the magazines. A lot of people in Europe who are very serious about their faith and who see something bad coming down the pike. And it's easier, I think, for them to see. And I'm talking about Western European Christians too, because they have lived through de-Christianization. And I've said on this podcast before, Kale, that it's such a blessing for me to come over to Europe and talk to fellow Christians here about the crisis facing us, because I don't have to convince them that this is an epical crisis. They get it. And we want to try to help my fellow Americans understand this too, and build these networks of collaboration while we have the freedom to do so. So it's pretty exciting.
It is pretty exciting. It's hard not to feel. It's interesting that the European Christians that you've been able to meet in the last couple of years, and with both of your your tours there, they sort of no longer need convincing, as you say, because things become clear.
Yeah.
Whereas in our country here, I still feel look I feel like I'm a relatively sensitive person, and so I sort of can kind of free feel it. I can sort of feel the tremors, but you certainly look around you and you do not see what I would consider a seriousness of critique and a seriousness of purpose, watching the country kind of unravel in some pretty significant ways.
Yeah. With these shootings that keep occurring, I'm always amazed at how unserious we are as a people about metaphysics. That anything seems to map on. If you're a regular denizen of Twitter or wherever, Facebook, I suppose, but everything immediately degenerates into this us-them policy argument. And I marvel at our ability, even in the wake of these shootings, even in the wake of the unraveling of the social fabric, we still want to turn this into, let's go Brandon and, screw Trump. It really strikes me as very unserious. Yeah, very unserious. And, again, this is not just a left-wing thing, as you say. Everybody falls into it. And the whole debate over wokeness in the church, it's an important one to have to keep this stuff out because it's fundamentally anti-gospel. But it's also not the core issue. If you're...
Well, explain that to me, because I'm not sure.
Well, yeah, I'm just sort of echoing what you just said. It's like Paul Kingsnorth is so great on this. He talks about in his writing, and he's got a great Substack called the Abbey, A-B-B-E-Y, of Misrule. Paul talks about how we're fighting the machine, capital M, the machine. And this is the thing that is the great enemy of the human race, and it's the enemy of Christianity now. You don't get any of that understanding in the intramural fights among the American church. It's all fighting about critical race theory or LGBT. And look, these things are significant.
It's just politics. Just politics. It's like, and it's really pretty shallow stuff. And look, you and I would both agree, of course, that policy is important. Neither of us, I speak for myself. I certainly don't think that policy is unimportant. But I'm looking at things and feeling things and seeing these patterns, and it's like, look, we need to contend with the fact that evil is real and that people don't know what they're for. On a fundamental level. This is not about gun control. This is not about a 12-week or a 15-week stay on abortion. All those things are important and worthy of discussion. But if you think that you're going to sort of chip away at the coming sort of chaos of unbelief by establishing a 12-week or a 15-week or a 3-week or a 7-week period, you're not being serious about what we're facing as people.
You got that right, 100%. And, and the American Christians, I'm talking about our own people too, people on the left and the right, are so binary. We're fighting the last war. I'm thrilled that Roe v. Wade was overturned. We haven't even talked about that yet. I'm thrilled. It's an answered prayer. But, now that has happened, that's just one thing that we're facing. That the deeper thing is, as you say, the loss of meaning. And what Paul Kingsor talks about when he talks about the machine, he's talking about something also that is satanic. I'm talking about not in a literal sense. So he may mean it literally too. I would certainly say literally, but
I do.
I do too. But even if you don't believe in the Satan figures, Luciferian in the sense of empowering man to do whatever he wants with the natural world, including the human body. That's what we're dealing with now. And if we don't know what we're for and who we're for, then we're going to be rolled over. And that's the sort of thing that I want to help build conferences about, to bring leaders from Judaism, Christianity, serious people to talk about these issues and not hash over for the millionth time, LGBT. Or if we talk about LGBT, then let's talk about it in terms of what is the human person, that sort of thing.
Right, because the default mode for this era of the machine is, I think to sort of use Kingsnorthian framework there, the machine robs humans of their capacity to build out meaning. Mm-hmm. It seems to me that the meaning, the feeling of the meaning crisis or meaninglessness or the chaos or genuine nihilism comes about when you no longer have faith in yourself as a human person with a telos and a destiny made in the image and likeness of God, that you are actually feeling that kind of, I would say satanic, you could say nihilistic pull toward, you mean nothing. Mm-hmm. You are nothing. You are, fundamentally manipulable. And so, so some people are fine. Yeah, they're in charge. They can be kind of the big cheeses, but all of us that exist in the middle are just genuine, just parts in the machine.
Yeah. Yeah.
So no wonder people have this overwhelming feeling of despair. That's what the gospel can speak to. Not to abortion policy post Roe, although it should too.
Yeah.
But what about fundamental issues?
Sure.
Way prior to issues about legislation.
Totally right. Totally right. And one thing too that has really jumped out at me in the reading I've done for my re-enchantment book since you and I talked last is the importance of attention. Martin Shaw says in one of his books that we show something is holy by the attention we give to it. He said, and this is one of his pre-conversion books. I mean, he hasn't written any post-conversion books. He just converted. He said, go down on your prayer mat. That's what he says. Go on your prayer mat, because that's where you find what is holy. That is where you find what can't be co-opted by the machine. And Ian McGilchrist says the similar thing, talking about attention. This is what the monks, the Benedictines, they all knew, that attention, you are what you pay attention to. And we happen to live in a world now where our attention is fragmented in a million billion ways.
Well, yeah, no, that's exactly right. I've been similarly sort of taken with this notion of paying attention. I just such a curious phrase, to pay attention. It's just, even in the language, it's a curious construction. But to attend to stand up to and for and toward and all of that. But what does it mean to pay attention in what we also call the attention economy? If it seems to me that the machine has been able to sort of capture our attention vis-a-vis social media and the internet, et cetera, et cetera. We call this the attention economy. And so everybody's fighting for our attention. And so what does it mean to pay attention in an attention economy? I think it sort of intersects with the crisis of being.
Yeah. Well, this is something that I've learned. This is my prayer rope. I've been rediscovering the Jesus prayer. I mean, I never lost it, but I've being in England and doing a lot of walking around Cambridge, I prayed the Jesus prayer a lot, and that is all about focus, clearing your mind and learning how to focus and creating a still space inside yourself. Reading a couple nights ago Martin Shaw's book, the most recent one I think is called Smoke Hole, about the hole in the top of a teepee or something. And he talks about the importance of going out into the woods and sitting there and just being flushed, having your brain, all the things that scatter us being flushed out of you. Said, and learning how to become awake and sensitive to the movements of the animals around you and of the forest and all that. He said, it's a very trippy thing after you've been there a while. And he talking about his 101 day retreat that led to his having this miraculous vision. He said that he knew that after about 20 days, he'd be like, okay, I've had enough out here. I've had enough. He said, that's when you have to resist that. You have to keep pushing through, because the real growth won't come until after you push through that. Okay, I've had enough. And that's exactly what happened to him.
It's interesting because fasting works the same way.
Yeah.
You hit these, you hit the whatever, the 12-hour mark, and it's like, you can make it past the 12-hour mark, and you kind of fine again for another few hours, and then you hit a 24-hour mark, and then you're fine for a longer period of time, and then so it's very interesting that those things kind of align, that you need to sort of push past these points of distraction. It reminds me of the Pascal line, which I'm sure I'll butcher, but the world's problems stem from man's inability to stay in a room by himself for 5 minutes.
Yeah, and that's
and
me.
I do think that scales. Me too. And I've been thinking a lot about this because I don't just make a podcast. I'm an avid podcast listener, and I was thinking about this the other day. I can't remember a time in which I've not gone on a run without my little ear pods.
Yeah.
And so about 2 weeks ago, I'm making myself take audio fasts when I do my walk or my run. Not every time, but certainly more than I've done in the last 3-4 years, and just to listen to my lungs and my breathing, and listen to the birds and my dog's chasing squirrels and all that, and it's hard, but deeply edifying on the other side of it.
Well, I've been in Hungary this week waiting on my papers to get done, and I've had a couple of really interesting conversations. This afternoon, I was in a coffee shop working, and a man walks up to me. He recognized me. Living Up My Lives is out in Hungary. He comes over to me. He's in his late 40s and just starts talking and wants me to sign his book for his son. And he said, my son is a big conservative. He loves America, but not the America that exists today. He said he loves Reagan's America and all that. So when that America's gone, he goes, I know. And then he starts talking, the man did, about how he used to work for an American multinational company. And he said, honestly, I do not understand what's happening. Where all of a sudden in the last 5 years did suddenly all this focus on race, gender, and sexuality come from? I'm like, oh man, you're talking to the right guy. But what was so interesting, Kale, is that the man was so clearly anguished. I'm going to put this on my blog later. He let me take a picture of him, and so clearly anguished, like talking to me like somebody who had a message. He said, your country was once so great. We looked up to you. What has happened? Is it ever going to come back? I mean, it was striking to me as an American to hear that. And he said this is something that, from their perspective, it's just been lost like in the past few years. He said, nobody cares about China, what the Chinese are doing. Nobody cares about Russia. Everybody cares about America, because you are the most important country in the world, but you're lost. He said, I don't know what's wrong with you. And I said, brother, I don't either. But
boy, doesn't it seem so true? And honestly, I know this is sort of very Dreer and Zeldin of us, right, to sort of do this, but I a little moment of basement here, but it really does feel true, Rod. Would that it were not. I mean, I have no interest in in my kids growing up in a world in which, the country and the communities that we've known are unraveling at a quickening pace that I never would have guessed.
Right.
Like, I did no joy in that.
No. And, I was having lunch a couple days ago with this young Hungarian woman, and she said that she's 25 years old. She's helping me get my visa, and she's an office worker. And I took her out to lunch just to thank her for all her hard work. And, she said, I'm really proud of my country. And she said it in a way that you knew she was totally sincere. Yeah. And so I said, what are you proud of? And the thing is, she didn't say any sort of noble ideals like you might hear in America. She just said what it amounted to, because it's mine, because I feel like I'm part of something greater than myself. She said, yeah, we have liberals, we have conservatives here, but she was talking, Kale, about just a basic sense of community that we just don't have anymore in America. And, and it's just really too bad. I was really moved by what she had to say. And I told her, I said, I'm older than you. I said, when I come to Hungary, and this is something I have trouble getting Americans to understand, but Hungary is like what America was around 1988.
So it's interesting that you say that, because I've been writing more the last month or so, and I finally started writing about Stranger Things, which is the Netflix series that I think season 4 part 2 just came out, and it crashed the Netflix server. I mean, it's this weird kind of throwback show, not only in terms of its content, but in terms of it actually has captured a widespread audience. It's very popular. But my sense is that the mid 80s, let's say, because the show starts in 1983 and it's gone through, I think, about 1986 by now, something like that. But there's something necessary. I really believe this, Rodrier. There's something that we left in the 80s that we need to figure out. I don't mean sort of a political retrieval project.
Right.
You and I have made fun of the zombie Reagan thing enough times. It's not really what I'm talking about. It's not like a sort of a simply let's just go back but something happened there and then that has been forgotten. And I think that our current obsession with that, and I think it has something to do with evil. I think it has something to do with metaphysics. I think it has something to do with purpose. I think it has something to do about living in an analog time and it's pre-digital and all those sorts of things. And so it's just interesting to hear that this person you had lunch with sort of has this sense of America in the mid 80s. I think there's something to that.
Well, I was the one who told her that this country in Hungary feels like America then. And what it is, it's not about technology. They have the same technology here, but it feels like there's a sense of cohesion here. There's a sense of normality here that we don't have in America anymore. And I'm struggling to put my finger on it, Kale, because everybody here is on TikTok. All the young people are. You see people with freaky tattoos and stuff like that. Yeah. But it doesn't feel like the country is coming apart. Just today, when I went up to the immigration office.
It's got to have something to do with faith. And I don't mean faith narrowly understood, because I've talked about sort of the numbers in Hungary too, but like a faith in the community.
It's a faith in order.
Yeah, right. Okay, good. Yep. Yeah. That's what I mean. That fundamental, like, prior sense of faith.
Yeah. There's a faith in the order. Like today in the coffee shop, I got friendly with this young teenage guy. He was 17 years old, Zoli, who was my waiter, and really sweet kid. And I was working on something about Tiara Mack, that lunatic woman from your state.
My state. Yes. Yeah. She's not my senator, but she is I have to claim her.
Yeah, she's
if you don't know where we're talking about, you need to go to Rod's blog and check out
Tiara Mack.
It's really quite something.
Yeah, she's a black state senator, self-identified queer woman. Ivy League educated at Brown. She went on to TikTok and did a short campaign ad where she stood on her head on the beach and put her big fat butt in the air and started twerking while she was on her head. And Tucker Carlson said perfectly, he said, could there be a better symbol for the Democratic Party today than this woman with her head in the sand, shaking her big fat butt? But anyway, I showed him that, and this kid looks, and he goes, "What's the meaning of that?" Like, he was disturbed, and I told him, "This is a state senator," and he was just disgusted. And
Rod, so go back to the mid-'80s with me just for a second here. Can you imagine any public official in 1985, let's call it, any public official, anywhere on the spectrum, however big time or small time, whatever, can you imagine any public person, employee, doing that?
No. No dignity. No.
It's amazing. There's no dignity. There's no sense of decorum. Like, being an adult. Like, adults don't do that.
No. No, it was disgusting. And that's just it. And that's the thing I saw in this kid's eyes. I have no idea if this kid goes to church. Chances are he's never set foot inside a church after his baptism, but he has this sense that politics is supposed to be dignified, that the people who lead us, whether they're on the left or the right, are supposed to be freaking grown-ups. And people here behave that way. Today, when I left the immigration office, after signing some papers, I decided to walk the 1 mile to the nearest subway station instead of take a taxi. And I walked through a neighborhood that I never in a million years would have done in America. I mean, I saw a wino peeing in a bush. It was a rough neighborhood, but I never felt endangered. And I knew I could do that because this is Hungary. And even though it's a lot poorer than America, there is a sense of order here that you just don't have back home. Now, I don't want to say that this is a paradise. It's not. I mean, there was a wino peeing in a bush. But that's when we had winos that peed in bushes in America in the 80s, and you didn't feel that sense of menace like you do today.
No, it's remarkable. There's stuff going on, man. There's stuff going on. All right, well, look, we are rounding out our allotted time here, Rod. What's next for you?
Well, I'm waiting to see today, as you and I are recording, my podcast I recorded with Jordan Peterson is supposed to be dropping soon. Yeah, I finally got on Jordan Peterson's show talking about Live Not By Lies, and man, that was a kick. The guy is so intense. He's
not like me, in other words.
No. Yeah, I mean, he's not like me. He is I'd heard this from people who had been around him in England when he was in Cambridge. They said, great guy, but not a light moment. And it was really true. But I really enjoyed being with him. And
so good. It's so good. I can't wait to see it.
Yeah. And so I'm sitting. I've got to be in Budapest for another week before I'll be able to go back to Vienna. And then got to be doing some more traveling, doing research for my book. Want to go to Ireland with Martin and Paul. And then
are you going to see Paul?
Yeah. We're supposed to do it in September, but I'm probably not till September. But I got to come back at the end of August or early September, pack my stuff, and move over here. My son Matt's moving over with me. As soon he finished.
Oh, he is. Oh, that's great.
He's finishing his last semester at LSU this fall. Then he's going to move over and go to grad school in Europe. And big changes. I mean, the divorce is making this possible, and I'm really sorry about that. I would like nothing more in my life than to be back home in Baton Rouge with an intact family, a happy family, but that's not where things are. And so I'm going to come over here and see if God has something for me to do here, and then as soon as things cool down back home, maybe I'll get back there and we can, Julie and I have tried to be amicable about this. We wanted to be amicable, but you can't blow a family up like this without things being unsettled for a long time. So,
real pain.
Yeah, a lot of pain. And I went to confession today to this Orthodox priest here in Budapest, and I was, telling him about how I'm really struggling with anger over all this and a sense of dislocation. And he told me, he said, "Look, don't try to fight your anger." He said, "You can't let it master you, but." Said you're only human, and this is a massive thing, a thing you didn't choose, and you've got to let that. I don't know how exactly he put it, but his basic message was you've got to let the anger out, but you've got to ride the anger and not let the anger ride you. So this is, I think, one of the reasons I'm coming over here. To be honest, Kale, is to heal. I feel, and if I can be personal here, I feel that Louisiana has been so poisoned for me. You remember I went back there in 2011 hoping to be there with my family in St. Francisville and Star Hill, and that didn't work out. I got real sick because of all that, and my sickness in turn caused so much pressure on my marriage that the marriage collapsed. And so, man, I love our home state, but it's nothing to do with the state itself. It's just I feel like I've been stripped of everything, and I don't really feel like I'm right back in the dark wood. When I got back to Louisiana, I found out the truth about my family. They didn't want us there, and I was in the dark wood. Dante showed me the way out. Well, I'm back here again, and I'm going to reread Dante once I get done with the enchantment book, because, but this time I'm going to pay attention to Dante's sense of exile. Dante, the poet Dante, was kicked out of Florence and can never go home again. I realize now there's no home for me to go home to anymore. And I was thinking this past week about in Paradiso, the third part of the Commedia, Canto 17, Dante is talking to his ancestor Cacciaguida, who gives him a prophecy. He said that you're going to know the taste of salt in your bread. You're going to know what it feels to go up and down another man's stairs. And those are really powerful symbols, because
it's so embodied. It strikes you so much. The taste of the bread, another man's staircase.
Because in Florence they don't salt their bread. So with every bite of bread Dante takes the rest of his life, he'll be reminded that he's not at home. Going up and down another man's staircase, meaning he's going to be staying with other people. He won't be at home in Florence. And that's what's facing me now. And it's been ripping me up, but I have deep, deep faith that God is in this, and that amen.
I mean, look, I hope this doesn't come across as trite, but I do believe that God has plans for you yet. And I think you have to sort of, you have to drain yourself of all that stuff, right? I mean, all of us are going to be stripped in the end. Some of us get stripped before.
I just, some people have been on me about, you're going to Europe, you're going to leave your kids behind. And the truth is, nobody outside of a marriage or a situation like this knows all the details of what's going on. And my son Matt's going to be here with me. My son Lucas is 18, is getting out of the house. My daughter Nora and I, we've got a lot to work on. But I think God is with us. God is going to be here. Got to keep reaching out, keep trying and hoping for the best. And, I've been writing on my Substack, Kale, about how, and the Martin Shaw stuff really brought this up again too, about how the myth that the Lord seems to have sent me was Tarkovsky's movie Nostalgia. And my poor readers on my Substack, they hear me talking about this all the time, but I keep going deeper and deeper and deeper into this, because I believe that God showed it to me for a reason. And one of the most powerful images of Tarkovsky, and I'm going to watch this movie again tonight after we get off of our chat, is from Andrei Rublev, Tarkovsky's 1966 movie. And there's a scene in there where the icon painter, Andrei Rublev, in medieval Russia, he's in the ruins of a church that has just been sacked by the Mongols, and all of his art has been destroyed. And he's so disgusted with the destruction and the disorder of his life that he doesn't want to paint again. Well, the ghost of his mentor, Theophanes, shows up and tells him basically, no, you've got this wrong. Your role in life is to keep bearing witness to beauty and goodness in the ruins of the world. And Theophanes looks up at one point, snow starts to fall through the destroyed roof of the church. And Theophanes says, there's a terrible beauty about snow falling in the temple. What he meant by that was, snow is not supposed to get into a church, into a holy place, but it has been profaned, it has been broken. And yet, here comes snow. It's Tarkovsky's symbol of grace. So I'm sitting.
It is in Joyce as well.
Is it?
At the end of the day, Gabriel sees snow falling here and in all of Ireland and into the west. It's a beautiful image of grace softly in death.
Yeah. And so what I'm doing now is looking for the snow falling through the ruined temple of my marriage and of my family's life. and looking for redemption, looking for my own repentance for my own sin and all this. I'm looking for redemption. I didn't mean to go so deep into the ditch here, but this is part of the drama. I mean, it's not. I feel like I need to go. Coming into Hungary or into Europe for this season of my life is a going into the forest for me.
Right. Well, I think since I've known you for a long time, this is hardly the kind of triumphant turn to Europe that you may have envisioned when you were 20. This is a whole different thing.
Dude, this is licking my wounds and trying to build something good, some network that will be able to help the church and help other people who are struggling to deal with suffering and to prepare ourselves as a community to deal with suffering.
That's right, because it doesn't seem like we are prepared. I think that's definitely what I've been seeing and feeling the last couple of weeks here since we last talked. We just don't feel up to it just yet.
No, we're not. And I've had this feeling that maybe this is the Father Kolakovich thing coming true, that maybe I'm supposed to be in my own small way a Father Kolakovich. I'm not a priest. I'm not even particularly holy, but somebody's got to do this work. And if I'm not going to, maybe there's a Father Kolakovich who will be empowered by the work I do. I hope so. Anyway. Yeah,
I do too. All right. Well, look, Rod, this is the real deal. This is why we do it. I appreciate you coming back on, and we keep this thing going. So, until next time, I suppose. Why don't you send us off?
I want to say, don't get nothing on you. I got to learn how to say it in Hungarian if I'm going to be living here. But don't get nothing on you, and we'll be back soon. To be continued. There's a lot going on in the world, a lot going on in Europe for us to talk about. Next time, I want to talk about what's happening with the Dutch farmers. That revolt. I think it's going to spread. It's what they're doing there is going to be spreading. So you and I are going to have a lot to talk about. It's going to have relevance to America too.
It's coming, whether we want it to or not. All right, man. You be well. We'll see you next time. Bye now.